I'm Mike Saliba. We have our three guests with us. It is a Mike majority panel today. I think what we'll do is we'll give everybody a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and let us know why they're here. And we'll go from there, whether or not you guys have questions or if some questions arise, we'll get to that and we'll get started. Mike, you have the mic, Mike.
Oh. Yeah, I have the mic, so I get to go first. My name is Mike Maharrey. I am the National Communications Director at the 10th Amendment Center and also work for Shift Gold. So you may, if you follow the economic finance world, you may pick up on my podcast, The Friday Gold Wrap. I don't know, what else do you want to know? I mean, yeah, that's pretty much all you need to know about me. So I'm going to pass it on to this dude.
That sounds good. I am actually Mike Maharrey, and I work for the 10th Amendment Association. No, my name is Mike Tremott. I just relocated from Florida to Virginia. In Florida, I ran for Congress as a Libertarian. So those of you who are running for office, I know the pain that you're going through. Good luck with that. I just retired from my second career as a police officer in Florida. I worked for a town in South Broward County in the rough and tumble for the past 12 years. Before that, I was a professional economist for about 20 years, worked for the federal government and some agencies, international agencies for the White House for a couple years, had my own business educating bankers for a long time, and worked as a free market advocate in Washington for quite a while, launching a campaign for the presidential nomination. So I'm really happy to be here. That's right. You want reform or not?
I was a real banker, private money, unlike this guy. I ran my own mortgage company. I'm Clint Russell. I'm the host of Liberty Lockdown. So I was a private money mortgage broker for about 15 years, entrepreneurially for about a decade. And when the lockdowns happened, I decided to get involved in politics and start to speak out. And I swiftly realized that there was a home for my righteous indignation towards the government. So now I kind of travel the country trying to get the message out to more people. I guess my primary focus has been ESG as well as, fighting the Federal Reserve. So thank you guys for having me.
And the Fed, baby.
All right. Hello? Oh. All right. I just want to get things started because usually, if we have a panel, everybody's running for something. We got the 10th Amendment Center, we got an active politician, and we got a podcaster. That's three completely different avenues for spreading liberty. I'd say the 10th Amendment Center is nonpartisan politics, but institutionalized. Running within the Libertarian Party is very partisan politics. And then podcast is more out into the general culture, though. So how do you balance these three different ways to sort of spread liberty and libertarianism, both in and out of the party, in and out of ballot politics? And what do you think the balance should be for everybody in this room, depending on how they feel suited to it?
It's a great question. So our approach at the 10th Amendment Center is very much more of an issue-oriented approach, doing activism, working with people across the political spectrum on specific issues to move the needle for liberty. Obviously, I think this is a good strategy because that's what I do, but I certainly don't think it's the only strategy. And it's interesting that you say this because I'm actually going to address this a little bit in my talk later this afternoon, so I won't delve too deeply into that. But I'm a big believer in the notion or the idea that you get in where you fit in. I get frustrated when people want to take this all or nothing approach. You've got to do it this way, and if you don't do it this way, then you're some kind of idiot. I think there are many pathways that we can take to advance liberty, whether it be through electoral politics, issue politics, podcasting, art. There's many, many different avenues, and I think really what everybody needs to do is figure out, what am I best suited at? How can I harness the talents and the abilities that I have in order to push liberty forward. So I'm very ecumenical when it comes to liberty. I want to see more working together and cooperation, even if it's in different realms, even if we disagree. I mean, there are people that don't do electoral politics. I don't really tend to, but I really support what this guy is doing because it's a different pathway and he can reach different people than I can. So ecumenicalism in activism is kind of my thing.
Boy, I think that's well put. I don't even know what to add to that. Do what it is that motivates you and that you feel like you'd be good at and you're comfortable with. For those of you who haven't, you ought to see Clint's podcast because it's really good. He's good at this sort of thing. He's the right guy to be doing it, and he was motivated, obviously, by what was going on at the time. So it gave him sort of a mental entree into getting worked up about what was going on public policy-wise, and that motivated him to do something that he was really good at. For me, being an economist in Washington, if you don't bump into something every hour that bothers you, your eyes are not open, right? You're not fully awake. I was there when President Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes, and then like an hour and a half later went back on it. I'll tell you, as a young economist, that leaves an impression on you. That's someday long ago I was a young economist. That really leaves an impression on you. And if you're not an economist already, when you become a police officer, you become one real quick. You get motivated by the effects that you see of bad public policy on people and neighborhoods that you really care about. And for me, it was that motivation that got me involved with running for Congress. But to Mike's point, whatever it is that motivates you and whatever is your comfort niche, go for it, because there are 100,000 ways to do this, and we got to do them all as a team.
I totally agree. The way I describe it, it's kind of like we're halfway through the fourth quarter and we're down by 25. Like you got a full court press. And most importantly, whatever you're passionate about is probably what you're going to be best at. So a lot of people will say, well, you shouldn't be wasting your time podcasting. You should be focusing on local electoral politics. You shouldn't be running nationally. You should be running state level. There's these fights that go back and forth, and I understand the arguments behind all of them. But the reality is that we don't really have time to fight with one another, and also we need to be all hands on deck. And if you alienate people that don't want to go your particular route, well, then you lose out on whatever they could have delivered in the other realm. And I'll start the doomsaying already. I really don't feel like we have a lot of time, both economically as well as governmentally. The increasing tyranny that we're experiencing, it's vitally important that we all act now, as opposed to this is why I don't talk much philosophy on my show. I'm more like, all right, I'm out of the philosophical realm. This is praxis. It's here. It's happening. It's
live action.
It's live action, and I wish it weren't, but it is. So I think just pursue whatever you're passionate about.
Does anybody out there have any questions for the panel or a member of the panel? All right, no questions yet. I got another question. In the time that you have been active in the liberty movement, is there anything that going into it you hadn't thought about as a way of spreading liberty that your time in it made you aware of and now you would advocate? Is there anything you would want to turn anybody on to? Let me give you an example. I never thought about getting appointed to a township commission until I showed up to one of these and somebody was talking about township commissions, and then I got on my historical commission. It would have never occurred to me. Is there anything you think isn't obvious? Running for office is obvious. What's something else you might share to kind of inspire anybody in the room?
So my story is kind of that, what he's talking about, because when I got involved with the 10th Amendment Center, I wasn't really a liberty guy. Not in the sense that I would be now. I didn't know anything about libertarianism. I was pretty much a Rush Limbaugh Republican. And through the 10th, so I start with the 10th Amendment Center. I had those kind of instincts that a lot of Republicans talk about, the whole idea of limited government. I'm like, that's cool, limited government. I like that. And I knew that there was this thing called the 10th Amendment, which was supposed to limit the federal government. I like that too. It took me about 6 weeks working with the 10th Amendment Center to figure out the Republicans really don't care about limited government. So I joked that the 10th Amendment was, for me, a gateway drug into the broader liberty movement. Because through the work, through getting more involved in seeing with my own eyes how the political process works or does not work, and then also being exposed to a lot of new thinkers, starting with, we kind of poo-poo the founding fathers a little bit sometimes as libertarians because they're old and a lot of times they're statist, but they had a great deal of political wisdom. And if you look at the intellectual revolution that happened prior to the American Revolution, it's pretty astounding. So you start with that, and then you start reading Bastiat, and then next thing you know, you're reading Rothbard, and then you're an anarchist. So it's kind of this trajectory. So I would say that sometimes conventional politics can be a gateway into broader understanding of liberty.
Yeah, that's true and well said. Speaking of things that you might not think of, is I think one of the things that you were trying to hit on. Living your best libertarian self and just being true to your values and honest with how you feel about things and being honest with your family and friends and letting people know that it's okay to feel the way you do and to stand up for your principles. I mean, you don't have to be a jerk about it the way I do with my family, but, there's nothing wrong with questioning the duopoly, right? And, be kind to your Democratic and Republican friends. They may be way deep down inside under several onion layers, more libertarian than we think. To a certain extent, they are inside cults, right? And you need to save them intellectually, if not, officially and legally. Let them know that it's okay for them to think about the Constitution and even be anarchists, although that might be going to one train stop too far for most of our Republican and Democratic friends. But let them know that, it's okay to think about the Constitution and live up to the principles for which they profess, even if they don't act on them.
This is brutal going last because they steal all the best answers.
Go first next time.
Yeah. Along the lines of what Mike was saying, I found, because I'm a second-gen libertarian, I've had this worldview since very, very early on. So I was in the fortunate position also with being a mortgage broker and being a private one, so I actually understood the underlying market fundamentals. I was able to warn people before the 2008 collapse. I was also able to start my podcast and warn people about the economic fallout that would come from the lockdowns, as well as the efficacy of the vaccines and whether or not they should be considering getting one. So the reason I bring that up is just to add to what he said, is that if you're actually able to kind of truth tell in a way that's almost psychic seeming to people that aren't from our worldview, that's very powerful. I've converted almost everyone in my life, friends, family, and it's all because after enough years of me being right, they can't help but pay attention. And I'm not super special. I just have an Austrian economics worldview, and I pay attention. So I think that's a very powerful thing, and I know that the vast, if not everybody in this room, is capable of it. Unfortunately, because of corporate jobs and things like that, oftentimes people will be afraid to speak out. So I just want to encourage people to have the courage. Do it. You could literally be saving people's lives at this point.
Okay. Any questions yet? Oh, come on over.
Could you help me with the position of libertarians on global warming and climate change? I think of it as one of the greatest threats to our civilization coming at us, and yet it's so easy to ignore. But if we really accept the scientific community that says we are warming up and humans are causing it. And we're seeing results like we see in the western side of the United States the last few years. To fight climate change, global warming, it's going to involve our government telling us the smallest details of our life to counteract it. What is the Libertarian Party's position on that? I'm struggling with it.
I probably have a very unpopular opinion given the lead in on that question. Well, first off, I'm born and raised California, so I understand the governmental malfeasance that has led to many of the wildfires. So if that's what you're referencing, I would caution you against believing that that is a product of global warming. I would also say that if you believe that global warming is an existential threat, the last entity that you want to remedy it is going to be the federal government. I really believe that. And they're going to sell you on the idea that because it is so existential, it's going to require basically the removal of all of your rights. And you've already seen that. I think that the very logical progression from COVID lockdowns is probably, green lockdowns. And I don't think that that's a solution. I personally believe that if you free the market and you allow people to remedy a problem, if it is legitimately a problem, and if it's legitimately existential, you should see incredible innovation. ESG, which has been my focus, is an accounting practice where they basically judge whether or not your business is doing the best things allegedly for the world, for pollution, things like that. And let me tell you, it's a complete fraud. So I would, basically I'm saying, if ESG were legitimate, they would have Tesla ranked very highly. And instead they have, Northrop Grumman is A-rated and Tesla is very low. So it's just not legitimate. And I just think that ultimately, if you're concerned about this stuff, the market has way more power to innovate and to problem solve than entrusting not just the federal government, but more likely some sort of global governance. Sorry, I said a lot there.
Really quick before you drop the mic off, what does ESG stand for something? What's ESG?
And environmental, social, and governance. It was created by the UN in 2004 and propagated by the World Economic Forum in 2009.
And it's a real problem. Someone had argued that the federal government would be the worst agency to represent us through the green movement. I think that there's other good candidates, including the UN. I think the EU. There are organizations out there that are just every bit as illiberal, anti-competition, anti-capitalism, anti-economic, anti-human as the federal government is. That's not to say our federal government is any good, but there are other candidates to take that trophy. And I worry about that in the context of this. While I may not be quite as convinced that it's an imminent and eminent and immediate threat, the truth is that change is downstream of a cultural awakening. We do not want to lead this with public policy. You should no more want a Democratic or Republican president to lead the world toward greenness as you would want them to lead a military intervention in Iraq. They're just as incompetent as that sort of thing. So, Clint is right. We need market forces to lead these changes, and we need, for those of you who believe, as I assume that you do, that there is an existential threat out there, we need for those cultural forces to bear down on the capitalistic markets that we have to make these changes. Now remember that the problem is not inside the United States. The problem is in places like India and China, whereas the greatest ground can be made up, right? So no amount of electing Joe Biden or Donald Trump is going to matter one way or another there. They're just going to bring more problems to us and not much solution elsewhere. So what you really want to do is work hard at opening up those economies to cultural forces from around the world. Good luck with that.
Boy, it is hard going last. So the first thing that I thought of as the question was being asked is Hayek's knowledge problem. And it really goes to what Clint is saying. I'm no climate expert. I have ideas, but it's something I really try hard not to even get into debates about because I'm smart enough not to debate about things I don't know about. But let's just assume, let's just take the argument at its face and assume that climate change is a serious issue. It is human caused. There is something that humanity can do to reverse it. Let's just accept that premise. I still don't think that getting a committee of 10 people together to micromanage the environment is going to work any better than the brain trust that just micromanaged a virus, or the brain trust that micromanages foreign policy, or the brain trust that micromanages our money, or I could go on and on and on. And it's really, Hayek really drilled down to it. There is too much knowledge in the world that is too widely dispersed to allow any type of central planning solution to really, really work. Now, is the market perfect? Of course not. But the market tends to work itself out. I just saw this thing today. Elizabeth Warren is running around pushing to standardize charging cords, which I'm assuming is probably going to work just about as well as the federal government standardizing gas cans. And if you've used a modern gas can, you know that didn't turn out very well. And I said, this is basically, imagine if the federal government back in the 70s and 80s decided we're going to standardize video as beta. So I'm just very distrusting. We worked out video. We work out a lot of things through markets. I think the dispersed knowledge coming together is going to be a much better approach than some type of top-down centralized government approach.
Yeah, go ahead real quick.
I just wanted to add one thing that the advent of fossil fuel utilization has lifted billions of people out of poverty. And for us to turn on a dime and say, well, we're doing well, and now India and China and these billions of people that aren't doing so great don't have the same opportunity we had, I think is unfair. Some might even call it evil. If you look, I did this master thread a week ago where I lay out, Sri Lanka, by the way, fell today. Their presidential palace was overran, and that was a product of ESG implementation in their government, in their economy. They no longer have fuel. They're out. They're bankrupt. And they're the first of many. And if you look around the world, there's uprisings that are happening from very impoverished people that have been technocratically managed under these guidelines that are espoused to be a solution to climate change. So I would just encourage you to be very cautious about giving your support to these movements because ultimately they're going to hurt people. And there's simultaneously this belief that we're overpopulated and that it goes the same way. You could argue the opposite side, which Elon Musk has been arguing. I've been arguing for a long time that having larger families and seeing who might actually come up with the innovation that gives us unlimited fuel, that finds ways to reduce carbon without starving people to death. Those people might not be born because we believe that the planet is overpopulated. So it's a very complex topic.
Okay, we're coming to the end of the time, but before we let you go, I have a two-part question, sort of not intuitive, but so
Which part do I get?
each part real quick.
I don't have to do it.
I just want for you to real quick sum up what anybody in the room can do to help you do what you're doing, but before you expect them to do it, let us know what your most anti-libertarian view is, or your biggest statist view.
Biggest statist view. All right, I'll go with the cop thing. My biggest statist view is that we will probably always have some form of police. And by always, I mean, I'm going to go for the rest of the century, we're going to have some form of police. Now, for those of you who don't know me well, I spend an enormous amount of time talking about law enforcement reform. I'm a big believer that we need to fundamentally change the way that we manage cops in this country, and on any number of levels, all the way down to the very detailed, granular level of how we train cops. We have to change a lot. We have to change the relationship between unions and municipalities, and that means ending, instituting private sector liability insurance and ending court deference to police officers, which is so enormous these days. And it's not just a matter of qualified immunity. It goes a lot farther than that. So I'm big on reform, but I recognize, and yeah, I heard a few yoo-hoos in the audience, so maybe we need to argue about it a little bit. But I recognize that we're probably going to be burdened with some form of criminal justice system in this country for the remainder of the century. It is my view that we have, and I will brook no argument on this point, we have the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. And it is a heartbreaker for anyone who wants to ride in a car with me for a couple of shifts. You will see that we are very efficient at destroying people's lives. And it's not because all of our politicians are evil, it's mostly because they're idiots. It's the nicest thing I can say about them. So the two things that you can do, yeah, you know, I'm running for president, so if you want to go on my website and learn something, that's great. But learn a little bit about your criminal justice system and be open to the idea. For those of you who are rah-rah, you know, cop, and I know that in our party we don't have too many of those people, keep your mind open to the deep reforms that we need to make and how it affects people that are not in this room. It can't be about us. It has to be about families that are really under the thumb, that have to experience persistent intergenerational poverty. And for not just years and decades, but for generations. It's a real problem. So good luck with that.
Definitely my most unpopular position is that I believe that if you want to have open borders, you have to have it in tandem with ending the war on drugs, ending the war on terror. A litany of policies that I think it would be catastrophic if you were to just flip the borders open, as we have ruined the world for my entire life. So I know that upsets a lot of people. As for supporting me, obviously you can check out Liberty Lockdown. You can share it around if you want. But the main reason I started it was not really so much for people to listen or share it or support the show or anything like that. But I wanted more liberty in my lifetime. And I am speaking to a room filled with people that want the same. So I don't need to tell you guys anything about what you ought to be doing. I just want you to keep doing it and do it with passion. So thank you guys for doing what you do.
My biggest statist position is I have absolutely no problem prosecuting people who drive slow in the left lane. That lane is for people with ticket money. If you ain't got no ticket money, get to the right. Now, actually, in reality, my legitimately biggest statist position should be pretty obvious to all of you. It's the Constitution. What's more statist than a Constitution, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. As far as helping me do what I do, you can visit 10thamendmentcenter.com. It's all spelled out. I'm going to talk a lot more about what we do here in a little bit. And if you want to help me out even more immediately, you can check out my book that I'll have back here on the back table and buy it from me for $20.
All right, thank you, everybody. And one more time for our panel. And we'll get things wrapped up. Joe told me he's super excited to get back on the podium and run those Roberts rules. What? You got something? What's going on? Okay. Yep. Oh. Do we have a question? You just want to? We can do one more. No, they all walked away.
Don't leave us hanging, dude. Come on, give us a question.
I'll go, okay, all right.
Screw the rules. We're libertarians.
All right. mentioned justice reform, okay? And it is my opinion that there are two groups of people in this country that want laws passed to cause a problem. All right? For instance, back in the 80s, there was the crack cocaine problem. Those same people who wanted it to be stopped went to the government to pass some laws to try and stop it. In my opinion, I believe they knew it was going to cause a racial problem in the country. So they got the law passed, and then now they turn around and say, see, the government is doing this because of your skin color, or your sex, or whatever. I think our party should be more vocal in saying, well, they are the cause of the problem by having these laws passed. Other types of laws, like for instance, the curfew laws in Detroit, that law was passed and it was kept on the books, and then all of a sudden you get a lot of people who are so-called impoverished, they start to be arrested, and then all of a sudden those same people who are asking for the curfew laws say, well, see, this is what happened because of the government doing this. I think we have to be more vocal in saying that those citizens are the problem, not the police officers, but the citizens going to the politicians who have the laws passed to cause the problem.
Yeah, that was a little bit longer than I thought, but yeah, good.
No, it's okay. I'll make up for it with a long answer. If I can speak just 25 feet away from you and use the microphone at the same time, I agree wholeheartedly, especially with where your heart is. Let me play on that just for a moment with a view that is simpatico with yours, but maybe coming at it from a different angle. I believe that a lot of our policy in the United States and around the world, whether it's related to criminal justice or not, is driven by fear. And if we look just back over the last couple of years, I think you would have to agree that a lot of our stupid pandemic policies were driven by fear, and politicians' ability to manipulate our fear in order to gain authority and power to themselves. And I think you see that in the criminal justice system in a big way. Consider that most voters, whether you're black or white, most voters do not anticipate being on the wrong side of the law. So a lot of them are wrong about that, but it's a very easy thing to push, to your point, it's an easy thing to push politicians to crack down on what they perceive to be as threats. And politicians are more than happy to stoke fear, to position themselves as the way to allay your fears, right? I'm going to be the solution to your problem by passing a 1996 crime bill or going back farther than that. You won't remember, but I do remember Richard Nixon and the policies that he brought in to represent the silent majority, which meant a little bit of racism, but a whole lot of oppression of an underclass. And I believe that the set of policies that were brought in the 60s and 70s laid the groundwork for the persistent intergenerational poverty that we see to this day. And when you layer that on top of slavery and Jim Crow, you get a lot of racism mixed into it. But our policies are sometimes racist per se, and sometimes racist because we're idiots and we put our thumb down on the impoverished.
All right, thanks for answering the rump question. It's almost 1:30. I'm going to put the microphone back and stop talking in it.